Hi guys, welcome and welcome back to my channel. I hope you guys are well and I hope you guys are staying safe. In today's video, I'm going to be showing you guys how to make this shirt, and this particular video will be focused on making the pattern. Next week, we'll focus on the sewing. So to start off, you need your pattern paper as well as your block or sloper. I have my block on cardboard, so I'm going to go ahead and trace it out, and I'm using a marker so that you guys can see. Now when I'm tracing, the first thing you notice is I start tracing from the neckline and then I stop around the shoulder darts, and that's because I'm going to be using a dart manipulation method known as the pivot method, and I'm going to be moving that shoulder dart at the top to the side or the armhole area. Now I haven't quite explained the pivot method of the darts. However, I have explained that manipulation using slash and spread method, and if this is a bit confusing to you, you can go ahead and watch that video to understand how to move your dart. The only thing I did was move that dart. So essentially I traced my body sloper for the back as it is, and then I moved the shoulder dart at the shoulder to the armhole area, right? So I haven't done anything really different. So go ahead and do this. Now I can decide that I want that armhole dart to now be part of my yoke, but first of all, let's go ahead and reshape my armhole. To reshape the armhole, you want to go ahead and close the darts just like I'm doing, and then using an armhole curve, you want to go ahead and draw in a new armhole. It might take a bit of fiddling, but once you're happy or comfortable with the way it's placed, go ahead and draw a new armhole and then use your tracing wheel to trace it. This helps you cut it out in the shape that is acceptable. So I went ahead to draw in the shape that the tracing wheel gave, and so far this is what I have. However, this is just a top at the moment, up onto the waist. We'll need this blouse to get to our upper hip line. So from the waist, I go ahead and mark 9 inches. And at the 9 inches point, you want to go ahead and square out, right? So basically you're squaring out by drawing a horizontal line that is perpendicular to the center back of the paper. Once you square out, at this point we now have the blouse length. On the line that we've just drawn, which is like the hip line, you want to go ahead and mark a quarter of your hip measurement. So whatever your hip measurement is, mark a quarter of it. I've gone ahead to mark a quarter of my hip measurement, and that's the mark that we have there. Now, because I want this shirt to be slightly free, I don't want it to be too fitted, what we're going to do is from the quarter of the hip measurement mark that I have at the bottom, I'm going to go ahead and square it up, right? So you go ahead and place your set square so that it's perpendicular, and then you draw a straight line all the way to the top. Squaring up from the hip, you'll notice that it's added a ½ inch towards the armhole and the bust area, which is great because the top is not going to be too big but not too tight as well. Now from the shoulder dart, we're going to go ahead and draw a line back to the center back, and this is so that we can create a yoke. We're not quite done yet, but let's go ahead and fix the hem. So at the hip line, you mark 1½ inches high, and then go ahead and draw curved lines like I'm doing now. By the way, this is absolutely optional. It's entirely up to you. You can decide you want your hemline straight, but I wanted to give mine a bit of a curve. So I'm going to go ahead and cut a little bit of this paper out, and the reason why I'm doing that is so that it's easy for me to convert that dart into a yoke, right? So I realized later that I placed my dart in the wrong position. So that's the armhole dart I'm talking about. After cutting out the piece, the first thing I want to do is slash a new line where I want the dart to be. So that's the new line that I want the dart to be. And then I'm going to go ahead and close the first dart, right? So just slash it after drawing the slash line, right? And then you want to close the darts. So again, just so that you follow, you first draw a slash line. That's the line that you want to slash. And the slash line has to meet where your dart is. And then you want to go ahead and close your actual darts. Now you can go ahead and separate it. So you have the yoke for the center back, and then you want to go ahead and label your pieces appropriately. Okay, if it helps, also add in your allowances, but like I said, we have a yoke and then we have the main piece, and those are the two pieces for the center back. Moving on to the front piece, we're going to repeat a similar procedure. So for the front piece, go ahead and draw a center front line. One thing you immediately notice is that my center front line is not at the edge of the paper, and this is very intentional. So make sure yours is not at the edge. Then go ahead and trace out your sloper. And again for this, I'm going to be using the pivoting method to move my shoulder dart to the armhole. The pivoting method involves you tracing your sloper, starting at a point and tracing it up until the first dart that you want to move. So if you notice, I traced from the neckline and I stopped where the shoulder dart started. And then I started tracing from the bottom, and then I, continued tracing until I decided where I wanted to move the new dart. Now, one thing is, when you decide where you want your new dart to be, you want to go ahead and mark that point on the sloper as well as on the paper, okay? It's very important. As you can see, I just traced carefully all through. At this point, I forgot to actually mark where I wanted the dart to be on the sloper, but I did mark it on the paper, but you'll notice what I mean in a minute. So then for the waist dart, we're not moving the waist dart, we're maintaining it. So I'm using my owl to make sure to mark all the dart points that are important, the pivot area and the dart legs, right? Now, with the owl or your pivoting tool in the pivot, you can go ahead and shift it so that it closes the dart. So as you can see, I shifted it as if, we closed or we sewed the other dart close, right? And then I continued the trace up until where I wanted the dart to stop. So here's what I was saying where I didn't mark it properly. So I should have marked, that little piece that I wanted the dart close on the sloper. So I went back to mark it on the sloper. Then it was easier for me to move it back to the shoulder that's being closed, right? And then finish up the bodice. So it might be a bit technical, a bit confusing. However, I will make another detailed tutorial on how to use the pivoting method to move your darts and for dart manipulation. If that's something you're interested in, definitely let me know in the comment section below. Also, if you found this a bit confusing, you're welcome to use a slash and spread method. Essentially, the only thing I have done is move my shoulder dart to the armhole. So whatever method works for you, go ahead and use that method to move the dart. Now, after moving the dart, this is what it looks like. This is what my bodice looks like. And we're going to do something similar again like we did for the back. So from the waistline, you want to go ahead and mark the same 9 inches that we used. And then on that 9 inches line, you want to go ahead and mark 1/4 of your hip measurement. After marking 1/4 of the hip measurement, go ahead and square up, making sure that your line is perpendicular to the hip line. And then go ahead and draw this in place. And as you'll notice, this adds a little bit of allowance to the bust area as shown. You can go ahead and close your dart so that you can reshape the armhole like I'm doing. So fold the darts in, and once you're comfortable, use your armhole curve to recurve the armhole and the tracing wheel to trace it out so that you have, the sewing position for the dart. Drawing the dart as shown, and at this point, this is what it looks like. We're almost done. However, we do need to do the important bits for this, which is the button stand and button extension. To properly explain this bit, you need to know the difference between the button stand and the button extension. The button stand is the total surface area where the button sits. So essentially, in some cases, it could be 3 centimeters, 4 centimeters, whatever. The button extension is half of the button stand. That is, if your button stand is 4 centimeters, it usually will extend 2 centimeters from the center front line. Now, if you notice, my center front line is in black marker, and now I'm drawing my button extension of 2 centimeters. That means my button stand extends beyond the center front by 2 centimeters. So from the center front to the red marker line is 2 centimeters, and that makes up my button extension. However, another thing you'll notice is there's another 2 centimeter line from the center front inwards. So from the first red line to the second red line, it's a total of 4 centimeters, and those points make up my button stand. However, from the center front line, that's the black line in between, to the exterior red line is 2 centimeters, and that makes up my button extension. I hope I've been able to clarify and not actually confuse you guys. Now that the button stand is done, I'm going ahead to label the center front line, which is the black line. Now at this point, before cutting out this, I should have actually extended it by adding the facing, so the self facing on the front on one of the sides, but I'll explain that in a bit. Go ahead and fix the hem just like we did for the back piece. So I raised it by 1.5 on the side seam, and then I did a curve, and then go ahead and cut out the pieces as shown. After cutting out the pieces, this is what we have. We have the yoke for the center back, the center back piece, and then the center front. Now for the center front, for one of them we need to make a facing, and for this facing is going to be on the part where you have the buttonhole. So go ahead and place your tracing paper over the button stand, and then we're first going to trace out the button stand, right, and make sure you mark the center front line as well. So we're tracing out the entire button stand, which is in this case 4 centimeters wide. After tracing out the button stand, go ahead and mark 0.5 centimeter allowance to the sides. So 0.5 centimeter allowance to the exterior and the interior side of the button stand, which is basically to the sides of the red lines that we had, right? Just 0.5 centimeter, not more than that. You don't need to add any allowance to the top and the bottom because we'll be adding this while cutting to everything either way. Once you're done tracing it out, go ahead and cut it out, and at this point make sure you cut it on the allowance, and this is going to be our facing for one side of the shirt, just one side. Last but not least, let's draw the collar pattern. So go ahead and draw a horizontal line and then another vertical line that is perpendicular. From the start point of the horizontal line, mark it as A, and then mark 1.5 inches up. Mark the 1.5 inch point as B. Now from A, we're going to go ahead and mark the neck back neck measurement, right? And that label that point C. So A to C is the back neck measurement, and then C to D is the front neck measurement, right? So whatever you take by measuring the paper, the pattern paper, go ahead and mark that, right? The next thing we want to also do is then mark the button extension, and in this case the button extension is 2 centimeters. So for point D, which is where the front neck stops, you're going to go ahead and mark 2 centimeters and label that as point E. Now we want to go ahead and raise point E by 0.5 inch, right? So mark 0.5 inch at point E and then label that as point F. Using a curved ruler, go ahead and curve in F up onto the line CD. So anywhere on line CD, curve it in like shown. And then after curving it in, you want to go ahead and use a set square to find angle 90 degree at F, right? So you can see it's not a straight line, it's at angle 90 degree, which is looks slant, right? At this from this view. Now from that slant line that you've drawn, mark 1.5 inches, okay? And then we're going to go ahead and blend that back into the first line. So from B, you want to go ahead and draw a straight line as shown, and then we're going to blend this back as shown. If you want, you can have this collar curved. So this is like a Mandarin collar. Some people call it a Bishopcollar, whatever name you want to use for it. You can go ahead and have it curved here, or you can leave it straight. I prefer it curved. So after having it curved, I'm going to go ahead and label that point G. And now the last thing to do is to mark in your sewing allowances all around. So use a sewing allowance of 0.5 inch, 0.5 inch at the bottom, 0.5 inch around the curves, 0.5 inch at the side. The only place we're not adding any sewing allowance is the center back, and that's because the collar will be cut on fold. If you're here and you haven't subscribed, please do well to hit the subscribe button and make sure to leave your comments, suggestions, and feedback in the comment section below. So go ahead and, cut it out as shown. Again, don't forget to curve the edge after doing the allowance, but then go ahead and cut it out. And at this point, you literally have like your collar pieces ready to go. Next, we're going to go ahead and cut out our pieces just so that next week we can focus on the sewing. So starting with the back piece, the center back, I'm going ahead to pin the center back unfold in this case because it is a shirt. So pin the center back so that it's unfold, and then go ahead and pin it in place. Mark out the sewing allowances. I recommend 1/2 inch at the top where you attach it to the yoke, 1/2 inch around the armhole so that it goes back to the sleeve, 1 inch maximum around the side seam so it's not too bulky, and then 1 inch at the bottom maximum as well so that you can hem it and it's not too bulky. If you like, you can use 3/4 of an inch at the side seam as well as at the hem. However, obviously you need 1/2 inch at the top where the yoke is attached and around the armhole where the sleeves will be attached as well. After cutting out that piece, we're going to go ahead and cut out the yoke. And for the yoke, I wanted to have like a lining or a facing for the yoke, so I'm cutting out 2 pieces at once, and then I'm going to cut out the collar piece as well. So one thing I do have to say about the yoke is you can decide to use 1 piece, and if you're using 1 piece, make sure that you do a top stitching so that it's you do a French seam so that it's neatly sewn and there's no overlocking or serging thread. However, I decided to do double so that it's nice and clean, and I made sure to sew it in a sandwich method. Anyway, enough of the banter. Go ahead and cut out the pieces. For the collar piece, you'll notice I didn't add any allowance because we've added that to the paper. But for the yoke, you want to go ahead and add in 1/2 inch all through as shown. So add in 1/2 inch all through as shown. And then lastly, we're going to cut out the center front piece. Now at this point, remember what I was saying that I didn't add the facing? You'll see what I mean. So pin your center front onto the fabric as shown, making sure you have plenty of space in the front. Now in the front, for one of the pieces, so you have a left and the right for the front part of the shirt because we're cutting 2. I would need a facing. However, I'm not cutting 2 separate ones. I'm not cutting it separately. I'm cutting it at once. So what I've decided to do is just add the facing onto the fabric directly because I forgot to add it to my pattern. So the facing that you need is 4 centimeters, which is the exact same width as the button stand, and then you need an extra 1.5 centimeters for sewing allowance. So basically you're adding 5.5 centimeters. So I added 5.5 centimeters to the already existing button stand, which is what I've marked now, and then I cut it out. So this is the first facing that we're going to use, and you'll see the difference when we're sewing. Then this is the center front that we've added the 5.5 centimeters to. Now, like I was saying earlier, this 5.5 centimeters will not be on both of the center front, just on the right hand side, so don't worry, we'll trim it off the second one. But go ahead and mark your shoulder dart so that you don't get confused, and also use your armhole to mark the pivot point. And then you want to go ahead and get the left side. So place the shirt as you would when you're wearing it and find your left side. Your left side is where we'll be using this particular facing. So we don't actually need the extra facing that we added to this one. We only need that for the right. I know this can be a bit confusing. However, trust me, this is a good method of making your shirt. So go ahead and place your pattern paper on it. And when you place your pattern paper on it, what we're going to do is just trim off the 5.5 from this one. So I only needed a 5.5 facing on one piece, not on both pieces, but it was easier for me to cut it on both pieces and trim it off later. That's what I'm doing. So I'm just trimming it off on this particular piece. I hope that makes sense. All right, guys, that's pretty much it. I trimmed it off on this particular piece. So now we have one piece that has like the button stand as well as an extra 5.5 centimeters, and then the other piece does not have a button stand, but it has a freestanding facing. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and join me next week. Bye.